What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily, and in this video, we are checking out the Samsung Galaxy A06. So a few things to know about this phone right off the bat. This is the successor to the A05. That sounds obvious, but there were two A05s, regular A05 and an A05s. And they were very different phones with different price points, different specs, different features. The A05s wasn't the newer version of the regular A05. They came out at the same time. The A05s was just the decisively better device. This A06 is the refreshed version of the regular A05. Will there be an A06s? I don't know, maybe, but if you have an A05s, this is not the new phone you're looking for. This A06 is Samsung's cheapest, least spec'd smartphone in their current lineup. I know you can technically buy older Samsungs for cheaper, but that's not what I'm talking about here. And this A06 is actually a lower tier device than the A05s spec-wise. In fact, and get ready here, the A06 has no new upgrades, no spec bumps, and no actual changes whatsoever compared to the A05 it technically replaces. And I swear to you, I'm not exaggerating or making some blanket statement that overlooks a bunch of minor things here and there. No, this A06 is exactly the same as the A05 inside and out. All right, well, there is one thing. You get a fingerprint sensor on this phone, which was somehow missing on the A05. But that's it. Everything else is exactly the same. At this point, I feel like 95% of you are about to click off this video, which is fine. But for the 5% of you who want to stick around and learn more about the A06, I'm going to fill you in on everything you need to know. I'll talk about whether or not this phone is worth it at its cheap price point. I'll go over some of its limitations because there are quite a few. But first things first, let's just quickly get this phone out of the box and I'll show you what comes inside the package if you do decide to still buy one. The first thing you'll find is the phone itself. We'll set that to the side for just a second. Underneath that is the typical Samsung logo stamped onto the packet of accessories, which contains the SIM ejector tool, a little stack of paperwork, and a USB-C charging cable. Obviously, not much included here, but I always suggest going out and getting the right 25-watt Samsung fast charger for these phones if you don't have one already. The phone supports that charging speed, you paid for it, you may as well take advantage of it. With all that out of the way, here is the phone itself. And let me just quickly rant about something. This little sticker on the back of these phones, well, this one peeled off and left a bit of sticky stuff behind because the rear cover is sort of textured, and man, this is just so annoying. It makes the phone feel even cheaper than it already is, and after trying to wipe it clean, the phone still had dark smudges and sticky goo stuck between the lines. It matches the messed up box that also had a sticker I could barely get off, and there's just something about a cheap phone also having a cheap, frustrating package and unboxing experience that really irks me, especially from a company like Samsung. So here's the phone itself. And right away, if you're familiar with these budget Samsung A-series phones, I think you won't really be surprised with how this phone looks. Size-wise, it's a 6.7-inch device. That's the viewable screen area corner to corner, which is big, but obviously there's also a lot of excess on the front. A bulky bottom chin, an old-school camera notch, and pretty noticeable black borders all the way around. On the one hand, it's awesome to get such a big screen for so cheap. This phone, by the way, is about a $100 device, which is crazy, to be honest. I don't think I mentioned that yet. Obviously super affordable compared to most everything else from Samsung that people are probably more familiar with, but it still looks like a budget or older style Samsung phone for sure. Around back, the A06 is still all plastic. The back cover is plastic. The frame and housing is all plastic. There's a subtle texture or design, if you want to call it that, and there's 3 colors to choose from. This one is actually white, and there's also blue and gold. And while plenty of other A-series phones have this same sort of design and build, the dead giveaway for this phone is its 2-camera lens setup, which, by the way, was not upgraded or changed in any way from last year. Taking a look around at everything else, the squared off sides and very flat profile at least make the phone feel decent in the hand. And on the left side, Samsung still kept the physical SIM card tray with MicroSD Card support. For this phone though, expandable storage is basically a necessity because this phone starts at a 64GB configuration, which is not a lot. So popping in an SD card to double or triple that, I think is something you should absolutely do. And it's cheaper and more convenient than speccing this phone up to 120GB in my opinion. On the right side, you'll see the same old volume buttons and the power button, which, as I mentioned at the start of this video, is also now your fingerprint sensor for unlocking. Don't get me wrong, this is a great ad for this phone. I just don't understand why Samsung omitted it from the A05, but calling this a change or an upgrade should be an actual crime. At the top of the phone, there's nothing really, but at the bottom, you can all breathe a sigh of relief because the headphone jack is still there, alongside the USB-C port and speaker. And I do believe this might just be one of the last Samsung smartphones to still come with a headphone jack, since the A16 I just unboxed as well no longer has one. And actually, using a wired pair of earbuds might be the better option for listening to your content rather than subjecting yourself to the single speaker on this phone. I don't know why Samsung can't just add a secondary speaker in the earpiece to this phone, like all the other phones have. It really would make a big difference. When it comes to the display, while there was a lot of room for improvement from the A05, this new A06 has the same subpar screen specs once again. The 6.7-inch display is a PLS LCD panel with a 1600 by 720 resolution and a 60 Hz refresh rate. Those specs are no better than the Samsung Galaxy S3 from 2012. I mean, I think you can see even on camera here how rough the viewing experience is. The no-name glass covering the dim LCD display gives you all the glare. The screen is dim even if you crank that brightness all the way up, and the colors just don't really look right compared to what most of us are used to seeing nowadays on even the cheapest OLED panels. At this big size, while it's great to have all that screen real estate, it's very obviously a low-res screen. You can pick out the pixels just by looking at it from a normal viewing distance. At 262 pixels per inch, there's just too much screen and too few pixels to work with. And this is really a shame because the screen is the essence of a smartphone. And even leaving everything else the same and just giving this phone a 1080 resolution display, for example, would have made a huge difference. Or an OLED panel and keeping everything else the same. Just pick one thing to upgrade and we would have been okay. But with this display, I think this is probably the biggest drawback of this phone overall. The thing that surprised me the most with the A06 though, has got to be the fact that Samsung literally did not upgrade the internals or performance at all from the A05. Inside, this phone has the same MediaTek Helio G85 processor paired to 4 GB of RAM, and while those components arguably aren't terrible, getting the exact same performance numbers as the previous year's phone feels like a bit of a scam. I mean, arguably, Samsung could have picked from an endless number of SoCs to shove in this phone that maybe wouldn't have been so drastic of a change, but that could have at least been different or marginally better, 5% or 10% even, or newer. I mean, the Helio G85 was introduced in 2020, so we're not talking about a 5-year-old processor here. It's just odd to me that nothing was improved or upgraded. Like, are the margins on this phone so tight that Samsung has to basically re-release this exact phone using the same parts and pieces from the same junk part bin as last year's A05 to make up for it? I can't possibly imagine that's the case. Fortunately, last year's A05 wasn't a poor performing phone, at least by budget A-series standards, but obviously you have to understand what this phone is. It's still the entry-level, lowest spec, most affordable phone, and it's going to perform like one for sure. It's not going to be the smoothest experience in the world. It's not going to be good at gaming. I mean, it's kind of clunky going from app to app at times, but if you just need a phone to stay connected to friends and family, and you casually browse social media or watch a YouTube video from time to time, or want a backup or burner device, that's kind of what this phone is, with maybe a slightly higher overall standard of performance. The nice part is, on the software side, it's still a full-fledged Android 14 device with a lot of the Samsung One UI features you'd expect. No, this phone won't ever get anything AI, but Samsung is at least promising 2 Android updates for it. So I guess if you buy it today, you can be sure that a year or 2 from now, it'll still be current and supported. At the end of the day, I totally understand that there is a market for a sub $100 Samsung smartphone, so I understand that while this phone is pretty low spec, there's still going to be a group of people who are totally fine with it. I just wish Samsung didn't fool its customers into thinking this is a new or upgraded device, because unfortunately, it's just literally not. Also powering this phone is a beefy 5,000 mAh battery. That's the same size as like every A series phone though, new, old, high tier, low tier, I think Samsung just uses the exact same battery for everything nowadays. You do get 25-watt fast charging on this phone though, which is cool. Again, just be sure to get the right wall plug for it. And I feel like this is the sort of phone that people use sparingly. So I've seen comments saying that these budget A series phones can last some people 2 days on a single charge, which if you're not a heavy smartphone user, that's probably the customer base for this phone anyway, I could totally see that as a possibility. Finally, the other big compromise you make in opting for this entry-level A series phone is with the cameras. And again, Samsung absolutely could have very easily added 1 or 2 things to actually upgrade the camera setup, but literally everything is the same as the A05. The dual lens setup around back consists of the same 50 megapixel lens and 2 megapixel depth sensor paired to the same 8 megapixel selfie camera around front. And everything else within the camera app is exactly the same. Arguably, by today's standards, this is the aspect of this phone that's the furthest behind anything else you could buy. It's essentially a single lens camera setup, since the depth sensor probably isn't entirely necessary now, considering how much software aids in pictures nowadays. With no ultra-wide lens, no telephoto zoom, no 4K video, really no base level or even extra features here. I mean, this setup is pretty much just snap a pic with 1 click and be done. And the pictures, well, they look kind of budgety. You've got old, low-level camera hardware paired to pretty low-end specs, and what you're looking at is a low-end screen too. So I guess even if the camera was better, your pictures would still kind of look blurry anyway. But nothing here should be a surprise. I mean, do you buy this phone even if pictures are of any importance to you? No, definitely not. I would barely even consider the camera setup a feature on this phone at this point. It's just sort of a necessary thing to have in 2024 that otherwise affords you nothing special or unique. And that's tough given how good mid-tier and flagship cameras are. I feel like Samsung had extra room in their budget to add something here to improve the setup, but perhaps that would have made this phone too expensive. So yeah, unfortunately, this whole video was kind of unnecessary because if you have the A05, there is truly no reason to get this new A06. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen 2 generations of phones be so similar, but here we are. I suppose if you have some other Android device from 3 or 4 years ago and you want a new current Samsung smartphone that has a couple years of software updates ahead of it, guaranteed, then sure, the A06 is your answer, I guess. But not only can you get the A05 for cheaper now and basically have the exact same phone, but you can also just get a slightly higher tier A series phone than this one and get way, way more for your money. But what do you guys think? Is there any reason whatsoever to buy this A06? Am I just totally missing something? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, of course. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this video though. Be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys later.